Hello, it is time to head north. I'm Natasha Ryan. I am the VP of Communications and Business Development for the North Group. And here with me, my extraordinary podcast co-host, Vince Rocco Vargas. You may recognize his face. He's a Hollywood celebrity, Mayans MC, and he brought his buddy Sal on our podcast today. Sal, I'm so excited to have you here. Would you please give us a little bit of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, thanks for inviting me on here, Vince. It's always fun to hang out with you and get to talk to you. And Tosh, it's a pleasure to meet you.
You too.
So how far you want me to go back?
Anything interesting, Sal?
Right
Anything
on.
interesting?
Whatever you miss, I'll fix.
There you go. So I'm the first American born in my family. My parents came from Italy. And so grew up outside of Washington, D.C. area in Maryland, outside a little place called Rockville or Wheaton. It's outside Silver Spring. So really you could throw a rock at D.C. But so grew up there, spent a considerable time in the military, retired, I guess, last year after about 29 years.
Thank you.
Most of it was National Guard time, but I got about 8 years active duty. Thank you. That's how I actually met Vince. I had my propaganda shirt on like I do now. And he's like, "Hey, where'd you get that shirt?" And I was like, uh-oh, somebody's sniffing here. Let's see where we're going with this. But so spent about 4 years as a police officer. I think I've done every job possible to man. Used to be a financial advisor. Realized that wasn't for me. Went through the military, learned how to be a medic, and just fell in love with medicine. And then just last December, graduated from the University of Utah with a PA degree.
Woohoo!
Yeah,
You really have done it all, haven't you, Sal?
Yeah, jack of all trades, master of none, right?
I call that being 411.
Yeah.
Guys like me and Sal, we tend to jump around until we find what sticks. There's a lot of guys like us, and me and Sal became really close because it's almost like we lived exact lives, you know what I mean? And so it was funny. He didn't explain the whole story of how we met, but our kids were wrestling together in a high school tournament. It was one of their big first tournaments. And I got there and yelled at my daughter. I didn't yell at her. I honestly said, like, "Hey, baby, you're better than that." And she turned and yelled at me. She's like, "Shut up." And I was like, whoa, never heard that before. And so she was just so stressed out. She kind of snapped back at me, and Sal goes, "Don't worry, my son just did the same thing." And that was the first conversation we had, was both of us laughing about how our kids were so stressed in their first major tournament that they snapped at their parents. And then I looked over.
Let me add a caveat, Vince. They were both on the mat in the middle of a match and stopped.
Yes.
And snapped at us.
That makes it even better. 100%.
It was.
Yes.
I was red. I was mad and I was embarrassed. I was like, "Oh my God, this is like, I can't believe that just happened." And he said the same thing, right? And so we laughed. I saw his shirt. I knew he was a military of some sort. And the shirt, I knew there was probably a special operations tie. Sal was a special operations guy. I was a special operations guy. And so from there, we continued to, when we were in the same mat room with the kids, we became closer and closer. And it's just continued. Our relationships continued to grow. Coincidentally, that now two of our younger kids are in a relationship together, and it's just kind of continued to blend this friendship into, like, we're stuck together, man. Now we're stuck at the hip.
I know. I told Roman, I said, "Dude, don't you mess this up. Vince is my friend. He's going to be my friend no matter what." So
yeah, it's funny. But Sal, we do a podcast on all things kind of security and risk management. And I mean, we've had every topic you can think of. We've been trying to touch on, and this is kind of a different approach. Is I wanted to bring on someone who has lived a very similar life as mine, who has experienced some of the most, I guess, hardships we've seen through our careers of military and law enforcement, and as well as seeing what's going on in society today, but as well as a family man, because, in recent years, the active shooter scenarios have been growing, and they grow to the point where we start seeing, like, man, day to day, how can I be prepared for that event? Some people don't even want to acknowledge that there's a thing, right? Or they're like, I don't even want to have to prepare. But we live in a space where, and we've been trained to, like, failing to prepare is the worst thing you can do. And so, me personally, I've taken my concealed carry course. Someone taught me. Sal did. I have my concealed carry. I train as often as I possibly can to be good at what I need to be for the event that something happens. And I do it more not for myself, but for my family's sake. And someone like you who lives a similar kind of parallel life of that, we just saw recently the active shooter scenario during an event that's happened for almost 20 years. They've never had an incident until now. And to know, like, psychologically how damaging that can be for a community and how hard that can be for families, and that idea in the back of our heads that it could happen to any of us at any time. What are some of the things that, one, you have done to prepare yourself in the event that we go to a parade and something similar happens? But the biggest question I have is, how do you prepare your kids for this? Do you safeguard them and not tell them? Are you keeping them away from the truth of it? Or are you gently telling them, the realities of life that we live in?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Vince, because it's, a lot of times when you have anybody that's been in kind of a tactical or any kind of aggressive position where you have to defend others, it's something you start to take second nature, and you take for granted what you know and what you're able to do. And sometimes it's hard to pass that on to people, especially your kids, right? I mean, I got 3 boys, and honestly, like, I haven't even taught them how to shoot a gun, because it's just like, well, we're not there and I don't want you to be part of that yet. But to answer your question, I think, one, running is the wrong answer. I think hiding or having, I guess, ostrich effect, where you said not even bringing it up, I think that's the wrong answer. I think the kids need to know what's going on. They got to be prepared. Not everybody's going to be like you and me. Not everybody's going to be able to step up and do it, certain things, which I'll get to in a minute. But the more information and the more, I guess, knowledge and skill they have to get themselves out of a situation, I think is important. Nobody has to be a hero, but how do you fix yourself if you're in a situation like that? Or how do you get yourself to a spot where you can be protected or your family members can be protected, right? And so if you look at any active shooter training, there's always 3 approaches they take. One is you hide or you leave, right? The other one is you hide, or third is you fight back. Some of those I'm okay with, but like the last one, fighting back, you're going to ask someone that's never been in a fight, never been in a situation, to fight back against somebody when their stress level is so high and they've never experienced that before. They're going to go into total black mode. They're not going to be able to recognize or think clearly. But with my family,
let me interject real quick, because they teach us is that you don't rise to the occasion, you rise to the level of training.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly.
In these stressful scenarios, and Tosh, from our world, our training is so hard that the event is easy.
Yeah. This is interesting. Yeah.
And so when I say that, it's like, you're never going to rise to the occasion and show up with some super skill set you've never tried, but in your head said you could. You're only going to elevate. I
always think that I would be a total badass in that situation, but you guys are making me totally rethink my Wonder Woman skills here.
Well, no, we want to be realistic.
Yeah.
We want to be realistic. There's these paternal things too, is like, crazy parents can do crazy cool stuff too. But but if you're thinking you're going to throw a nice 1, 2, 3 combo and you've never thrown in your life, it's not going to look as beautiful as it does in your head.
Yeah. So, and with that, my big thing is teaching the kids how to recognize scenarios, right? And that's a lot of what that book is about, is being able to recognize scenarios. And, how common is it for kids to throw firecrackers in the school? And 18 plus years of going to school, that's never happened in my lifetime. But what happens if kids hear a sound that they're not used to? Oh, somebody's lighting a firecracker. Let me go check it out. And the next thing they know, they're looking down the barrel of a gun. And so part of my thing with my kids is it is not normal to hear that kind of stuff in a school. It is not normal to hear firecrackers in a store. It's not normal to hear firecrackers in a mall. And so if you hear those things, don't go investigate, just leave. Get out of the scenario. Go away. Like run. I don't care. And if somebody wants to call you names, let them. But at the end of the day, you put yourself in a situation to win and to succeed and to basically fight another day, if you will. So,
and Tosh, we have never had this conversation beforehand, me and Sal. But the crazy thing is I have taught my kids this a very similar. I'm gonna let you go on, but it trips me out to hear similar mindsets, similar ideologies.
Well, and I'm thinking the conversation I have with my kids, and I never even thought to liken it to firecrackers. Never thought to make that it, because that's something they can grasp. Because Sal, my kids are young; they're 5 and 9. Yeah. So like the firecracker is something that they could process. Whereas like I say, gunfire, they probably don't even know what the hell that sounds like. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think if you look back to, if I remember reading a report on Sandy Hook, which, that was terrible. I mean, anybody dying is terrible, but when it's kids that age, the principal heard gunfire and went to investigate. And so for me, that right off the bat, again, it's human nature, right? That whole saying, curiosity killed the cat. So I tell my kids, it's not normal. Don't go looking for what's going on. If anything, get out of the building, get away from where you are, go someplace that you can have some kind of protection or you're out of sight. And so that's something I teach them. And I said, and if you can't, then find some place that you can actually barricade yourself into, lock the door. Don't just hide under a table or do something. Like find some place you can lock the door or do something. Now, granted, we're talking about inside a structure. So, that's kind of you got to have a door there to have that. But, and then if they can't, then what, if you have to fight, then be prepared to fight. And if you have to fight, look around you and what can you use? So that's kind of the approach I have. I mean, there was in the special ops community, there used to be a course called Lone Operator. I don't know if you remember that, Vince, but they would teach you to do things when you were out by yourself and to use certain things as weapons, right? So I don't have it anymore. I was going to show you, but like if you have an old PC laptop, they have those bricks of of the power cord. You literally got like a 6-inch block by 2 inches on a string. For all intents and purposes, it becomes a weapon. And I said, you're in school, you have that, right?
Yeah.
Rock climbing. Nobody knows if you rock climb or not, but if you have 2 carabiners with a runner, which is just a cord connecting those 2 carabiners, well, now you have another weapon. And these are things that it's more like you said, Vince, it's mindset. Like, how are you going to find something to help protect yourself, right?
Yeah.
And nobody really wants to think about these things again, because why? Because it's gruesome. It's psychologically like damaging, or it's like scary. Like, you mean I have to hit somebody on the head with this block? Yeah.
Yeah. So the hard thing is that you almost take away the innocence of the kids, but you kind of have to at times when you're addressing these situations. And that's, as a parent, you're like, man, do I really want to introduce them into my world and my brain yet? And there's kind of the balance of what I try to do is give them a little bit, but not the most of it, right? Like I don't need to go down the road of like, you know what I mean? Like down a road that they don't really need to, but I do address on. So what my kids, Sal, in the same token, I said, creating distance, right? And I've studied a lot of active shooters and a lot of active shooter videos that they've recorded themselves. Mm-hmm. And I've realized that if you've watched a lot of these videos, it's the path of least resistance, because, they're in a haste and they want to engage as many people as possible. And so they're going in the path of least resistance. So closed doors, usually they don't twist knobs and continue trying. They just go, nope, that's locked. Nope, that's locked. Keep going. Yep. But at the same time, is I tell my kids, like, create distance. Like, distance affects accuracy. Most of these kids are not that trained. So the farther you get from the shooter, the more safe you would potentially be. Also, there is no rules in an active shooter situation, meaning you can grab a chair and throw it through a window and jump out of a window. In our heads, or our kids' heads, like you're going to get in trouble. There's no such thing as law at that moment. Yeah. There's chaos, and then chaos means you survive, and meaning you will have to grab a chair and throw it through and jump out. If that's what you need, there's no teacher that's going to say stop. You're going to say, no, I know this scenario. My dad talked about it. It's called madness, and madness means I go running straight to dad, and dad's going as fast as he can back to you, right? Like this idea of sometimes it's like if a cop asks you a question right away, you answer because like it feels like you have to. We're trained this way, and our kids are right. And your kids are trained not to like do things like throw a chair through a window. But I said like, but why not? In the case of your life, you might be saving more lives. Willingness to think outside the box of what the world has taught us and say, no, now I need to survive.
Yeah. You know, that's what I've taught my older one. That I'm like, you get out at all costs. If that means you break something, you crawl out of something, you get out at all costs. It doesn't matter. And she. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm like, if you have to break something, you break it. It's fine. In those moments, you do what you got to do. But, you know, you said something, and I wanted to come back to this, that what do we do? Like, do we instill that kind of fear in our kids? And I automatically think back. So when I was little, it was the Adam Walsh case. Remember Adam Walsh?
Yeah. That's how the whole, America's Most Wanted started that way, right?
Yes. Yeah. And so, yes. So I remember being little, and my mom instilled the fear of God in me about kidnapping. Like I still to this day don't see a white van and go, nope, not going near it. You know, like I still to date. Okay. And so, but here's where this paid off. And I think of this because I think sometimes my kids are like, why are you telling us this? Well, I'm doing it for your own good, even though it doesn't feel like it. But I remember a scenario when I was little and we were out in the front yard, my cousin and I. We were in like a little fenced in front yard area, and this car drove up with two younger men, and they stopped. Our parents were just inside, but they weren't outside with us. And my cousin went right up to the car, and I did not. I tried to say, no, don't go. And I went right inside and grabbed a parent, and they came out and the guys took off. And like, I think back to if I had not had that fear of kidnapping, I may have walked right up to that car too. And who knows, right? But I remember being like in that moment, I can still remember it very clearly, being so afraid that I was like, no, don't go up. She walked, I went right in and got help, and they took off. So
Tosh, think of it this way, Tosh. Maybe it's not fear. They're preparing you, right? I don't want to instill fear in my kids. Right, I want them to be mentally prepared for these scenarios. Like in the military, we do a thing called wargaming, and it's like, if I'm going to enter a room, I got to think of like the worst case scenario that could potentially happen. And we do this in op orders. We say, okay, in the worst case scenario, we take casualties of this amount. That means that we're mission ineffective, blah, blah, blah. Right. But I war game every scenario. I walk into a boxing match and say, all right, the crowd would probably run this way. Let's find an exit that way. Right. And me and my wife do this just by like, this is what I do for my wife. I say, good exit. 100%. That's what we'll probably use. And I do this with my kids, and they probably think I'm absolute nutso, but I do it in a way where it's like common, like this isn't crazy. I just say, hey, that exit, if something happens, guys, we're going to be heading this way. Right. And I've kind of turned it into a thing, and hopefully it's not a fear thing. It's become a preparedness thing.
Well, it's good because it's becoming habitual in their minds. So now they're going to do it.
Yeah. And I mean, look, the truth is they've only been raised by me. So they're probably thinking like, why don't other dads do this? It's like, oh, Sal does this.
Well, you're both right. It's tough because like, do you really want to create hypervigilance in a teenage kid? But you know, it's a fine balance because it's one, do I give you the tools to save your life and give you a little bit of paranoia with it, or do I just, not give you any tools and hope nothing happens? And it's a balance. I mean, I don't know the right answer,
I think back in the day, you could roll the dice. I don't think in today's world you can roll the dice. I really don't.
No.
And
well, look, we prepare our kids for many other things other than active shooters, and we probably don't realize it because it's just day in, day out.
Fires.
Hey, fires, make sure no one touches you in these places. Don't talk to strangers. these are all preparedness. And back in the day, people would probably think that was instilling fear in them. But
I got to tell you, even the private part conversation, I know so many parents that still avoid that topic because they don't, it's so horrific to think about it. But I'm like, it happens. Like 1 in 4 kids are sexually assaulted, and it's usually at the hand of someone they know. Like you need to tell them about it, you know?
Yeah. It's, I mean, even the conversation of sex might be uncomfortable, but if I don't teach them, someone else will. You know what I mean? And so
you don't want them learning that on the playground.
Yeah, they don't need to learn that from their friends. Trust me, they don't know shit.
No.
So like, yeah, go ahead, Sal.
No. I was just saying, you're right. It all comes down to what we teach our kids and how we teach them. And they don't have to be able to handle every situation, but they got to be able to recognize it and then stay out of it, And that's kind of the approach that I try to take is, unfortunately, the former police officer, I mean, when we're downtown, I'm pointing out people to my kids on the street. I'm like, see that dude? See how he's holding his waistband and he's walking? You don't know what he has there. Maybe he has something in there. Maybe he doesn't, I'm
the same.
Because and this is just a side note, but Vince, you probably know it. Everybody does the quintessential check. Is my hidden weapon still in place?
Yeah.
Still hidden. It's a shirt hung up. Yeah.
Exactly.
And the other thing is, me and my wife have a tap thing where I tap her waist, and if I tap her waist, she goes to the other side of me. It's if someone's walking up on the side of the road and he looks just a little weird, I'm like, well, why would I leave my wife closer to him? I'll put myself there. So I give her a tap, boom, she goes, and we keep walking. No one notices. She knows it, but that's just been an habitual thing that we've done, and she gets it. She goes, I notice you do that. I'm like, that's my own. Why would I keep the threat closer to you? If he is a threat, put me there first. You know what I mean? And my kids do it too. We walk in the street and I put them away from the street. I put me there, and it's got like a hand shifting.
I'm like, nope.
Yeah. And those are things that subconsciously I think they get as well. They understand, but those are things that we do as a safety mechanism of just observing life. Like those are dangers, those are threats. And now all we're doing it on a grand scale of like potentially other threats could be, sad truth, active shooters.
Yeah, and you're right. You're both right. Like Tosh, you said something earlier about training for fire drills and stuff, and even like you said, the private thing. It's like parents don't want to. Like your family is a team. Like Vince.
Yeah.
In the military, this is what I'm talking about. Like we wouldn't even think twice. We would have so many contingencies in place. Hey, if this happens, we got this. If that happens, we go that way. But with our family, like civilians in our family, even me now, like your family's your team, but we still don't practice those safeguards. We don't, like that's for lack of a better term, put in SOPs or standard protocols for, hey, if I tell you I'm bouncing and we're walking in a grocery store, that means I just saw somebody I don't want to know you. And so I'm going to go this way, you go whatever, like kind of. So you're right. It's like very few families will actually set up things that says, this is what needs to happen if this happens. And it's unfortunate.
And it is unfortunate, but I understand the other side is like, it sucks that we live in an environment that has to be a thing. And so like, I think a lot of people don't want to digest that. Like you said, Natasha, they don't want to, that's too hard of a reality for them to give their kids, but it would be even harder reality if something did happen and you knew you could have trained them or prepared them and they didn't get that.
Yeah.
And so
you want to hear? Yes. And they don't. Vince, I want to give an example. So you and I did a podcast last week about trafficking, the border, everything, right? With the incident that happened in Texas, all those folks dying in the back of the semi. Awful. Okay. And so I post on my Facebook, if I post our family vacation at Disneyland, over 100 people look at it, like it, comment. You put a post up about the reality of human trafficking and you say, listen, friends, I know this is unpleasant, but it's so important. Please just look at this. I think maybe nine people.
Oh, sure.
I mean, they just don't want to hear it. And what I can't convey enough to people, of course, Sal, so my background is I was a news anchor for 16 years. So I disseminate information, right? Like I've always been on the educate, disseminate information path my whole life. And so I don't understand the not wanting to consume the information because knowledge is power. I mean, knowledge is power. They say that for a reason, right? So I really like, it just blows my mind, but people don't want to hear the gnarly scenarios that could play out, and no one's invincible. I mean, in my news days, if I had a penny for every time someone said, I didn't think this could happen to me, I never thought this would happen to our family. I mean, no one's invincible.
Yeah. It's unfortunate because even like I do teach concealed carry permit, and a lot of people they're trying to take not Vince, I'm not saying you, but there are a lot of, unfortunately, there's a lot of women that think getting a concealed carry permit is going to solve the problem, and it's not. One of your leaders in your world, Vince Grossman, right? He wrote that book. Yep. Lieutenant Grossman wrote that book, and it's called like On Killing, and then the psychological. There's another one I don't remember of it.
On Killing and On Combat.
Yeah, and it talks about the psychological impact that all these negative things happen on people, and especially, you know, when people want to. And I'm addressing your point, so bear with me. It's just a long way to it. They want to get a gun, and they want to be involved, and they want to be ready for all this stuff, but they don't understand the psychological aspect that comes with it. And so what do? They put their head in the sand and they ignore that whole piece of it. And it's unfortunate because this world, like you said, this world is not, it's not what it used to be when we were little. Now it's just getting out of control. So I don't know.
Yeah. And Josh, to add to that, so what Dave Grossman talks about is that us as humans, it is unnatural for us to be willing to take a life, and that people throughout the years have had to be desensitized to that. And there's studies from back in the day where guys in Civil War lined up were just loading their musket and not even pulling the trigger, loading it again and not pulling the trigger because they couldn't come to terms with actually taking a life. And so many people go out there and get their training done, and they get the concealed carry. They believe this tool is going to protect them. But in reality, it's not. It's a tool. It's the mentality side of it, the training aspects of it that most people miss, and that never understand. Like, that is the more valuable aspect of not just carrying a gun, is knowing how to use it and when to use it, right? Using that tool as a safety precaution and not as a threat, not as the chest box. And so, the scary thing in the world is that the more guns that are out there is like, I hope all the people that carry guns are well trained and understand the aspects of this. And when you do pull that gun, what comes with that, the psychological effects after pulling that trigger.
I've thought about that because, my dad is a veteran, and I know that things have been done, right? Like, but I think about, because I obviously have never been in a position where I've had to make that choice. And so I think about that, like, could I take a life? And when I think about that, I honestly don't know if it was just me. I'm not sure. I think the only way I could 100% say yes to that is if they came at my kids. If someone came at my kids, I'm pretty confident I would kill them. But I don't know that I could do it if it wasn't at my kids. I would hope in that moment I would have the wherewithal to think, well, you're their mom and you need to be present for them, so you have to do it for your kids. But like, that's a hard thing to think about.
Yeah. And as well as to identify that there's a threat of that capacity, as well as to identify, is this a justified moment? It's so many levels to this. And that's why, in the military, we train so much. We work with ROI, which is rules of engagement. We put ourselves through stress shoots. We put ourselves through stressful engagements, whether it's an innocent target or not, and all these things. And still there can be a slip up, a mistake. Yeah. It's multiple levels of like training and being prepared. Is not a one-time thing. It's a perishable skill of being good at the skill set, whether it's carrying a gun, whether it's pulling from the concealed position, whether it's just being prepared physically, mentally, emotionally. And so like, there's so many levels to it that it's a bit overwhelming when we talk about it like this. I'm like in my head, like, man, like, can my kids are athletic, thank God. But what if they weren't and they couldn't escape from an event, right?
Yeah. And
it's
so
tough.
when you go back to that post you're talking about on Facebook, People don't want to deal with it because it hurts. It's real. It's scary.
It's awful.
Yeah, and it's so they tend to ignore it. So,
and if you're empathetic, like an extreme empath, that stuff stays with you, right?
Yeah.
Like, and I'm sure you guys have, you have those moments that have stayed with you that I would say haunt you. Because I have moments, even, back in the news business when I started, and you were in smaller market sizes, the cops shared a lot with you off the record because you were someone that was on the scene. They could talk to you, and they could tell you things they couldn't tell the normal person, right? Because they thought, well, she's at all these crime scenes. This is what she does. She deals with it. I'd have to read the criminal complaints and reports with all of the gory details. And there's stuff that haunts me and I didn't even see it. I was just told about it. So I understand how hard it can be to consume this because of the fear that it won't leave you. But sometimes it takes that need to know those haunting things to truly be aware and protect your kids. That's just always.
I think we're at the point, and I think we've been at the point for several years now, to have your family prepared and ready for these events. And that to me is personally had the route that I've taken is that it's always a conversation. I always identify the exit points and the strategies. And whether it's me thinking in my head, like, okay, here's what some of the ideas in my head, wargaming with maybe my wife, my kids don't need to be a part of that conversation so much. So, but there's the exit strategy just in case, guys. And I say, if there's a fight and it's whatever, they all know there's an exit strategy for whatever event. But I think we've been there for a few years now. And that's the path that I've chosen for my family. I'm always prepared, even in my house now. I'm like, I lock the front door. Yes. I'm always prepared for the weird event. And I do think it's time. And Sal, is that something you as well? You're always prepared for it?
Yeah. And this is the thing, like, too, it's there's been a lot of focus on active shooters, but you just said it. It could be a fight. It could be anywhere. And that's the thing. They got to be prepared. And we have this conversation in my house quite a bit, but when I got out of the military and went to college, I had a communications class. And I literally, back then, we used to all carry beepers. I gave a beeper to a kid. I gave another kid a hammer, and I had a screwdriver in my back pocket. And my whole argument was gun control and that it doesn't work. But that's a different topic if you ask me. But and I basically told him the beeper's a bomb, the hammer I could bash your head in, the screwdriver could stab you. So I think back to your thing, Vince. You just got to have a plan. You got to have preparedness. You got to teach your family, your kids, whomever. It's like, look, it doesn't matter what kind of situation it is. One, you got to be able to recognize it. And two, you got to get yourself out of there. And so that's my piece. I don't know.
You know what's something? Sorry. Are you going to plug his book?
Yeah, I want to segue his book real quick.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so those of you who are listening, Sal is one of the authors of a book. Here it is right here on the screen, The Ultimate Travel Safety Program, Common Sense Guide to Traveling and Missionaries. And so we do live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and that is the people do travel out of country. And so as well as anyone who just travels for vacation or whatnot, Sal and his partner have written a book, and really it just kind of helps you make practical choices to keep you safe while traveling. And that's a big reason also why I want to invite you to this. But Natasha, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I don't know. I lost it.
Either way. Well, honestly, Sal, I really appreciate your time. It's cool that we've never had the conversation. So having you here, the conversation was very similar in mindset of what I do with my family. And so good to know that my daughter.
I know what it was. I know what it was, Vince. I know what it was. Okay. So what I was going to say is, again, I keep saying my kids are younger. Mm-hmm. The one thing that they're getting already that they can be taught, I feel like at this age, is when we go somewhere now, my oldest will go, Mom, that guy doesn't seem right. There's something. And I'm like, good. She's being situationally aware. And I'm like, always trust that instinct. If someone seems creepy or off, or you just get a weird vibe, you just stay away. Like you stay
Yeah.
away. And so she's already, we'll go into like a parking lot. She's like, Mom, that guy, no. I'm like, okay, good. Get in the car faster. Like she's starting to get it, which makes me very proud.
That's good. Well, let me say two things, and then I think Vince was rapping. But
yeah, Vince is
when
rapping.
we talk about kids, I don't think they're ever too young to learn. I think it's all how you present it with firecrackers and what you're doing. When we teach medical to younger kids, we equate like excessive bleeding to a hose, a garden hose. Well, what do you do when you want to mess with mom and dad and they're using the garden hose? You step on the hose. And what happens to the water? It stops, right? And so then what happens when you take your foot off the hose? The water starts going again. So that's the way we teach our kids, or when we're teaching, we teach kids to put it in a manner that they understand it. And I think that's a key aspect. And the military is infamous for nobody wants to train medical until it's too late. But I think what you were saying earlier, I don't think they're ever too young. I think if you can find a way that they can relate, I think you start training them that way. I think that's an important piece to it. The other piece I was going to say is some kind of medical kit should always be in the car, because you never know where you're going to be and where you are and what you need. And, if all you have is a belt with a stick and a rag with a stick, so be it. But as long as you have something that you can protect your family or save your family with. So,
yeah, my kids have a tourniquet.
Yeah.
They all have a tourniquet in their backpacks. I don't know. Sorry.
I was proud. Now I'm feeling inadequate. So
no, I think what you're doing is great, because if they're already recognizing it, that's half the battle. So, but no, that's awesome. So,
well, thanks, Sal. This was fantastic. Vince, great bringing him on. Thank you. And of course, come to tngdefense.com for more podcasts just like this one. And you can listen to audio on Spotify, Podbean, iTunes. So we're everywhere. Just tune in to Time to Head North for the next one. Sal, thanks again so much. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Pleasure to meet you.